So we're here to talk about purpose-driven careers today. When we think about the energy transition that's underway, I think this is one of the most exciting topics to think about. At the Environmental Defense Fund, we've just launched a new Net Zero Action Accelerator this week to empower employees within organizations with the tools they need to help accelerate net zero progress within their organizations. So as we transition this and empower employees and build the future generation to go into these roles, it's a really exciting moment to be involved in this. And so on stage, we have two pioneers in this field who are working to help really empower these folks to enter the green job space and to think about how we can make it more inclusive. We've seen that green jobs have grown over 200% in the past 5 years, and that's worldwide. LinkedIn has been studying this, and we still see this green jobs and green skills gap. The demand is greater than the skills that we have right now in the market. So the work that these women are doing right now is really important to help accelerate the transition. So I would love to learn or share with the audience more about the work that you're doing, if you could both introduce yourself. So Wawa Gathero, if you wouldn't mind.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wawa. I identify as a Gen Z climate activist. I've been in this space since I was 15 years old, and I've worn a lot of different hats in that time. And now the hat that I wear is as founder and executive director of the national nonprofit Black Girl Environmentalist. So we are the only national organization working to address the pathway and retention issue in the climate sector for early career Black women and Black gender expansive folks. And yeah, so I'm super excited to share more about that work with you all.
Great. Hi everyone, my name is Christy Drutman and I am the co-CEO of Green Jobs Board. We're actually tabled outside so you all can check us out. We are a climate tech company focused on bridging the diversity and equity gap within the climate space, and we are on a mission to build the standard for a sustainable and equitable future through our hiring support services. Thanks so much.
Yeah, that's great. And so I'm sure everyone here noticed today, but the Biden administration just announced a new American Climate Corps program, which is a really exciting moment of, I think, seizing on this data that we've seen worldwide and the interest in jobs growth and the need for the transition. And this is an executive order that just came out today. And I would just love to hear from you ladies. Are you excited about what the Biden administration is doing? There's a Justice 40 initiative and a lot of other things going on, but would just love to hear your reactions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really exciting to see that there's being funding directly going into this, especially to support entry-level roles. I think, a lot of the job seekers on Green Jobs Board do identify as entry-level, so it's really exciting that this is going to be a resource that we're going to get to share with them. We're actually sharing about it on our page later today, so we're so super excited about that. And I think it tells a story of how America as a nation is shifting its priorities on where money needs to go for the next generation of workforce development. And I think by putting dollars into skills training and workforce development in this way, it is ultimately going to start bringing that conversation into more communities to reckon with, hey, maybe you never even thought climate was on your radar as an opportunity, whether you're in high school or in college or beyond, but now this is providing new career pathways and ladders for people to engage.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting. I think for so long there's been this narrative of it's either jobs or the environment. And I think this is a unique opportunity where the administration gets to show that it doesn't actually have to be one or the other. There are ways for us to make a living, provide for our families, and do so in a way that's impactful, and one that is identifying and addressing the biggest crisis of all time, the climate crisis. So I'm really excited to see how more early career folks that may actually not have had any experience in the environmental or climate space have this opportunity as a gateway to actually continue to grow themselves into a green career. So I think it's really exciting, and I'm excited to see what happens with it.
Yeah, that's great. I tried to sign up on the website today, and so you can click on which box that you'd like to do to help, gain some green skills. And Christy was on the EDF Degrees podcast this past season, and so we were looking at these jobs gaps because there are lots of young people that want to enter these fields, but they have this lack of the skills, the experience, or something like that, and there's a mismatch. And so by empowering, creating these pathways for people to get some experience and gain those skills, you have an addition to the academic tracks. So now there are about 3,000 academic programs that offer sustainability in the programs, and back, 15 years ago, that was, much smaller. So we've seen this massive growth, but there's still a gap in getting these folks into the jobs that they want. So that's a really exciting new trend. And I wanted to ask you both, when we talk about these, purpose-driven careers, could you share a story of, why this matters right now?
Yeah, I can start. It's not a very hopeful story, to be honest. So I talked about how I got involved in climate at 15, but I didn't get the chance to tell you how that happened. So I spent the majority, so I grew up in rural Connecticut in the quiet corner, the corner of a state that most people aren't very familiar with. It's very beautiful, very picturesque, and I spent a lot of my time outdoors. That's where I spent a lot of my alone time. I came into myself in those spaces, but I really didn't identify as an environmentalist. I knew what an environmentalist was based off of the narratives that I saw on TV and like certain activities and the brands that people would wear, and I also thought you had to be white to be an environmentalist. So even though I had like a club, the first club I ever founded was the Save the Polar Bears Club in the 3rd grade. I go in during recess and basically cry, eco-anxiety with my friends, and we didn't do anything with that. But when I was 15, I stumbled into an environmental science class, and that course honestly changed my life. I had a really incredible educator. Her name was Mrs. Rose, and she decided to integrate an environmental justice chapter. And it was then that I began to understand that the climate crisis and environmental degradation wasn't just this thing that was outside of myself, out in faraway places that I felt like weren't as personal, to being an issue that actually was already impacting my community very up close and personal, and was the biggest issue of all time that was also disproportionately impacting people of color. So my entry into this purpose-driven work was out of survival. I was 15 years old, and I was realizing that the movement that has been tasked with solving the greatest crisis of all time is still struggling with aligning with the priorities of the folks that are experiencing the brunt of these issues. I was beginning to realize that there was a huge issue with the fact that there's a leadership crisis in the climate space almost 10 years ago. So that was 10 years ago when I was 15, and that leadership crisis still exists, right? The United States is made up nearly 40% of people of color, but we don't exceed a 16% green ceiling of representation. So there's this dichotomy of a lot of really positive trends of honestly billions of dollars of investments going into our green economy, going into the creation of green jobs. I mean, the IRA passed about a year ago, and we've seen 170,000 jobs created in that time alone. But if we know that our movement and our job spaces aren't doing a great job at including everybody, what does that scale and investment really look like, and who does that serve? So those are the questions that I was asking as a 15-year-old, and now as a 24-year-old about to turn 25 in November, these are still the questions that I'm asking, and what led me to found an organization that is hopefully addressing that and creating better pipelines for early career Black women and Black gender expansive folks to join the climate sector, but also to stay.
Wow, that's truly amazing. And I know working in the environmental space that we're due for this. And there's a report called Green 2.0 that is really trying to show some transparency on what the environmental movement looks like. And, if we were to realize a just transition, how are we going to get there? And it's going to require change, not only externally, but internally. And so seeing organizations reckon with that and allocate resources to accomplishing those things. And I think it's a great call out. And, amazing that 10 years later, same problems exist, and but we need to make sure that we prioritize that and get on the pathway. But Christy, I'd love to hear what you think about this too, like the purpose-driven careers. Why does this matter now? And if you want to share a story.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about my own story. I would say that as someone who really cared about climate, I didn't also grow up into being an environmentalist. That's not really what my family does, or people that I saw in my community really doing. But it came out of a place of advocating for human rights and really wanting to understand how can we help communities. And so for me, as I dove deeper into that and was super passionate, I got super active into climate activism and was building my CV of all these experiences, taking on unpaid internships, interning at federal government. I try to intern for private sector and nonprofit. Like, I really went out there and really explored, as they say, to try to figure it out. And by the time I graduated, I still had no idea what kind of job I could get or what kind of space that is in. So I'd say, like, the question is not necessarily like why purpose-driven careers, but like how do we get more people into the purpose-driven careers? I think the call to action, with the IPCC report and us fighting against a clock to prevent 2 degrees Celsius warming is looming. It's there, and we all know that 2030 is around the corner, 2050 is also right around the corner, even though people like to keep pushing the benchmarks back. But unfortunately, the temperature is continuing to rise, and we are seeing ecosystems collapse, we are seeing communities being threatened, and we have to reckon with that there needs to be things done in efficiency and at scale to get people into these jobs and to make those pathways so much easier. And I think Green Jobs Board has done a really great job at starting to build that conversation for people to say, hey, we need to make this more efficient. Organizations and companies now that use our platform are now looking at themselves internally and being like, actually, yeah, you are helping us be way more efficient to directly hire and recruit diverse talent into our teams. And it's just really cool that we get to build this tool and this platform that really is inspiring people to have that introspection. Like, if we want more people to be in purpose-driven careers, we have to create the work environment for them to want to be there. And that means a work environment with good pay. It means a work environment that is not going to continue propagating microaggressions and harm towards communities of color. And lastly, it needs to be a place where you can see a future. So actual career ladders, career pathways where you can actually see that that's going to sync up. And I think in climate work, because it is so emergent, it's kind of difficult sometimes to know what skills you need to get, what kind of credentials, where is the next step. And so our vision in the future of Green Jobs Board now being a part of that emergence is to have a platform full of resources and education that can bring people to that next level in a much more seamless way.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and so for the folks in this audience and watching online, if you had a few recommendations, we're looking back, we're 5 years ahead, and we're going to make this a just transition. We're going to help fight climate change, empower people in our organizations, and really try to accelerate, progress. What are, a few things that you might change to help us get there? Because these institutions, they're working the way they always have been, and we need to change so many things. So I'm curious if you could make a few changes with a magic wand or advise people in organizations, companies, et cetera. What would you recommend to people in organizations?
Yeah, I think all of us in this room, hopefully if we had a magic wand, we'd wish away the climate crisis. So that would be the answer to that. In the case that was off limits, and we had to work within the world that we're in, my second answer would be that young people don't have to be climate activists, and they can just be children. But again, working within the space that we're in now, honestly, I direct my wish to philanthropy. I think that philanthropy is still a very antiquated space. Right now, there was a recent study done with the new Youth Climate Justice Fund that recently debuted actually this week during Climate Week. And they saw that out of all of climate philanthropy, youth-led organizations only receive 0.76% of funding. Yet every single space we're in, it's let's platform youth, let's do this with youth. But when it comes to actually resourcing and scaling the solutions that we're already creating, it's not happening. But then we also look at Black-led nonprofits, for example. A lot of people don't know this. Well, August was Black Philanthropy Month. Black-led nonprofits in the United States, 75% of them operate at an annual budget of less than $50,000. And almost half of them is $30,000. So when we think about frontline communities having the resources to, again, scale the work that we're already creating as a means of survival and not having those resources, yet the general narrative constantly being about racial justice and centering young people and that, it's not happening, I'd say we need to really get our priorities straight. We need to be investing into those initiatives, those communities, and also taking a step back and understanding that the whole invite only or having these very weird pipelines to get access to even have a meeting doesn't serve us as a movement. We are in the defining decade of, the things that we put forth, the policies that we bring about, quite literally going to set the stage for the world that we are going to be living in and the world that we will be living in together. And so providing that money right now is so, so important. So I'd say, redistribute wealth where it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And since wealth was addressed, I also want to address power and power dynamics. I think, I want to shout out Green Leadership Trust. They're an amazing entity that's focused on bringing more BIPOC or Black, Indigenous people of color to be in leadership positions on boards of all of these big green organizations. But I think that could same apply to corporations and corporate boards. Thinking about how are you picking advisors and making sure that you're thinking about bringing in advisors who come from the direct communities where your technologies are being employed, understanding that it's not just a carbon footprint, it's a social impact footprint. And so if you are concerned about the long-term impact you're trying to make as a company or an entity, especially if you're in climate tech, you have to also address that there's going to be communities that are impacted either positively or negatively by your actions, by being there, by having a footprint in their area. So make sure that you're thinking about treating them as experts, as advisors, not just asking for permission, hey, we're taking up your space, but actually bringing them on into your leadership positions, hiring them as consultants, paying them for their time for that expertise to shape your solutions that you're trying to put out in the world, I think is really important.
That's a really great flag. I mean, this is expertise that people need to help empower their organizations to do better and go farther and faster. So those skills should be acknowledged and compensated. So that's a really great point. And so another thing, I'd love to talk about the just transition. Some people haven't heard this term before, and I'd like to know just what it means to you and how you define it.
Oh my goodness, there's so many things that fall in line with the just transition, but I see we have 2 minutes left, so I'll keep it brief. We can't have a just transition if everyone's not at the table. It's pretty simple. We need to make sure that all different groups of people are able to contribute their voices and contribute their expertise into the solutions that are going to make or break what a just climate future looks like for the rest of us. So that's how I define it.
Love it. Christy?
Yeah, I would say that we're seeing this shift, with the creation of all these new jobs. It's moving people away from extractive industries, from the fossil fuel industry. But a lot of those people have a commitment, have families, have towns and communities that are built around some of these industries. So how, again, are we making sure that there is clear pathways that ensure that they're going to have a proper livelihood, that transition isn't going to cause more harm, And I think it's really important, again, what I just said in my previous answer, some of those things you can be thinking about as a company or organization to think about workforce development trainings, funding that type of transition and making sure those communities aren't left behind.
And speaking of workforce training, I heard you guys are collaborating on a really cool thing coming up, and I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, so Black Girl Environmentalists, Black Oak Collective, and Green Jobs Board, we are all collaborating on a BIPOC Green Jobs Skills Fair for Gen Z young people in the beginning of November in Washington, D.C. And, if this is something that you feel invested in, investing in the youth, investing in BIPOC youth and green job skills development, then definitely come speak to us afterwards. We are looking for sponsorship to support that initiative.
Yeah, and I would just like to say, I've never seen anybody work a room quite like Christy, just off the record, just, at happy hours or gatherings, she meets one person who's looking for a job. She's like, tell me your name, tell me your number. I know this person, I know that person. I just thought that was a remarkable skill and not something like the authenticity embedded in people who are pioneering and leading things, that you are like soup to nuts on these things. And I just really appreciate that about you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining our podcast. And thank you to you both for the work that you're doing. We really appreciate you guys being here with me.
And I just wanted to give a quick shout out on Friday, if anyone's around. Green Jobs Board is hosting the Green Jobs Pavilion. Wawa will actually be a speaker there. It's at Marketplace of the Future, and it's a day-long event in the afternoon and evening. Just check out Marketplace of the Future and join us. Lots of talks and panels all about this topic to go deeper with experts. Thank you.